Alright guys, welcome back to part 3 of our surfboard build. In this video we are going to be putting the rails onto our frame and start shaping them. That means that we're getting really close and it's going to be awesome. Now all of my designs have a solid rail, which is to say that we laminate on a 25mm thick rail onto the outside of our blank when it's in this state. If you're using a DIY surfboard kit, you'll notice you have a few leftover banks of Paulownia. And that is what we're going to use for our rails. Now, we're going to use a method which is called bent lamination, which is we bend a strip of wood around this form and then keep adding layers until we have the desired thickness. And that makes for a very rigid and strong lamination. Obviously, we don't need to glue it on this thick, so we are going to have to cut this down to the correct width, which is a rip cut. And to figure out how wide your planks are going to be, just lay your blank on this floor and with the tape measure up from the floor to the top deck at its highest point and then add 10 to 15mm onto that for a bit of safety. So in this case, we're going to be ripping these down to about 90mm wide, but this will differ depending on which board you're working on and also which methods you've used to laminate your deck. Now I'm going to be using my bandsaw to do these rip cuts because I have one, but if you don't have anything that can actually do this operation, a jigsaw is fine. Just scribe a line, follow it, and cut it out as neat as possible. We trim off all of this excess overhang, so don't be too concerned if you get a little bit wavy, but do try and be nice and neat. Now, bending 4 strips of Paulownia like this around a form is going to be tricky if you don't know a few tricks. Trick number 1, wet wood will bend a lot easier than dry wood. So what we're going to do is we're just going to wet these 4 strips of Paulownia in a bath, essentially. So I just laid a tarp out over a couple of bricks, and then I can fill that with water and soak these for about 5 to 10 minutes. And then we'll also do a dry clamp up and let that dry out so the fibers become hard again. That will give the wood a bit of a memory, and it means that when it comes to doing our actual glue up, this timber is going to be a lot easier to conform to the shape of our rail. As far as clamping methods go, you can just get away with using some F-clamps and clamping it along the board, but as it gets up to the nose here, getting clamps to stick like that, it just doesn't happen. Now, I have these purpose-built sawhorses with a notch cut out of them, which allows us to mount our boards upright like this, and this is really useful because it means that I can actually use a ratchet strap through the sawhorses, and then once this is tensioned up down here, this actually brings our rails into a pretty good formation of this shape. Clamps are still required, but this just gets it a lot closer to where we want it for our glue up. Okay, so those have been soaked for about 10 minutes, and we can see they're definitely wet. What we're going to do is just lay it over the board with no glue applied at this stage. Chuck a strap over the ends. And what we'll do is we'll just apply 1 clamp in the center for now. All right, we've applied some clamps where it needs it to get it to be nice and tight on the rail, but where it's tricky to clamp, we can see we've got a nice tight lamination thanks to this strap, and the same down this end here. Because this is wet, now we leave it clamped up like this for a couple of hours to maybe even a day. And then when we release these clamps, this wood will be drier and also have a memory of this shape. So it's been a few hours, so we're just going to remove all the straps and clamps and then redo this, but this time we'll use glue so it stays like this. Okay, and this is what I was trying to demonstrate by doing a wet form like that. You'll see it has a bit of a memory, which means that now this is actually very easy to press down into position. So with the lamination, it's really important that you get good glue coverage on this first layer. Then it's just a matter of stacking it on one at a time until every layer has glue between it. Now this glue up didn't go to plan because what happened is I clamped things into the center position with the strap, and then when I started putting tension on the ratchet made contact with the ribs, and that wasn't good because it meant we couldn't get enough tension. So I had to unclamp it, reposition the strap, and then when I did that, things started to slip. So unfortunately, it didn't go very smoothly, so I couldn't move the camera around a whole bunch, but it looks like we got lucky because even though things slipped, we're still within the safety zone and everything has good contact. So what can we learn from that mistake just there? Well, the first thing is put marks on where everything should be aligned, including your strap. So come in with a pencil and put lines across everything so that you know that everything is going to line up in a straight line. And you do that when you're clamping everything in its wet position without glue. That means once you start applying glue, you just line up the marks, including the strap, and then you know that you're not going to run into issues like we had. This is only the second rail I'm doing in this method. This is a low tools method, and the first one went really well. This one was a little bit iffy. Like I said, we pulled through and it looks like we got away with it, but it could have been a disaster. All right, so we took that out of the clamps and what we're left with is this board. But now we've got to trim off all of this excess so we can start the fun part of this build, which is shaping the rails. The cheapest way of doing that is with a flush cut saw like this. So this is a saw that hasn't got a spine, so it's nice and flexible. And all you have to do is reference the blade on the board and pull it towards you until you cut all the way through. So you just keep firm pressure down on the skin of the board and basically cut away. The method that I use is using a multi-tool with the flush trim attachment. So this is essentially this saw, but in power form. So this is the same idea. Reference it on the deck and you just run it along the saw until it cuts the rail off. That's the rails trimmed off mostly anyway. So now what we're going to be doing is coming in here with our block plane and flushing everything up and getting everything looking good before we add our profiles. The technique here is the heel of the plane is on the actual deck skin while the blade is angled at about a 50-degree angle or thereabouts and just hitting the rail only. So as we come across, we're taking a shaving, but only of the high spots. So okay, so that is the rail trimmed over and ready to start actually being shaped to what we need. However, I did have a bit of a mishap and I drifted this was actually with the handsaw when I was recording just a little bit of B-roll for demonstrating the handsaw. That isn't a flush trim saw that I was using, that was actually a ripping saw. So it had set in the teeth, which meant it could grab. So I was trying to demonstrate it just so I had something to show you, and in doing so, it drifted and it bit into the board. So we're gonna have to put a patch here, but because this is wood, doing a patch isn't that hard. Now, I don't know how well this is going to show up on the camera, but if I lay this piece of wood over there, you should be able to see at least the air gap where it's gouged down here. This is just a little off cut of the same wood, and I'm just going to actually do a little inlay here. So it doesn't need to be quite as long as it is, and it doesn't need to be that wide, so we can trim it off like that. That's basically the shape that it is, so I'll just cut that out real quick on the bandsaw, and then what we'll do is we'll just flatten this section out that needs repair, just so we have a good glue surface so we can clamp that in place. Yeah, it will have a little bit of a grain mismatch, but I think I'd prefer to have a wooden patch here than a resin one, which will be kind of ugly. So we've basically just made a little flat spot where we can clamp that in place, like so, and then we can just basically flatten that off tomorrow with the hand plane once it's dry. So that's how you can do a repair. It's pretty simple. Not the end of the world if you make a mistake like that. Obviously, it's better if you don't do that, but you know, mistakes happen, so there it is. So we have our board with the rails attached and they're trimmed off so that they're flush with the deck. However, that doesn't mean that the shaping is done. So now what we have to do is come in here with a combination of our block plane, a couple of rasps and things like that, and then just basically smooth out this rail to make sure that it is a nice consistent curve on both sides, because Remember, as we clamp this, you get some compression, and if you have any waviness, you can get rid of it now. And then once we have a nice smooth outline of that board, then we can start working on the roundovers and our contacting rail shape. A purpose-built saw bench like this would be really useful because this allows you to stick your board in on its side, and this lets you really get into shaping those rails. Have a quick look at this, figure it out. These are basically just sawhorses with a hole in the middle. If you don't want to make something like this, you can just use your bench and just basically strap it onto the side. You can do most of your shaping with just a block plane, and basically what you want to look for is, from a distance, look at the actual rail and see if there's any really obvious high spots. But really, as you're planing, you will discover the low spots. So basically what we're looking for is a continuous plane shaving along the entire length, and that will basically make sure that we have a nice consistent curve. So with this, nice even pressure. Continue working along the edge. As you get close to the nose where this radius becomes quite apparent, you'll want to just change your plane angle to be more skewed and really just be focusing on getting a nice continuous shaving. Starting to bring that in now. See that now that's starting to create a nice continuous shaving. That shape is really coming in now. Now your hands are really useful for this. Just keep feeling it. You know, close your eyes if you have to, but you'll feel if there's any dips or high spots. And right here, it's really good up until about here. So there's just a high spot here still. That now has taken care of that high spot. It doesn't hurt to take a step back, like where the camera is here, and just sight the board from a distance, because then you can also see if the rail looks like it's, you know, misshapen. So looking from here, I'm pretty happy with that. The tail still needs some work, but the main portion is looking really good. All right guys, that is going to do it for this video. In the next one, we're actually going to start shaping the rails and finish that, of course, and maybe even install the hardware and do some fiberglassing, depending how much time the video takes. There may be a part 5, which is outlining the fiberglassing. Anyway, a big thanks to DIYsurfboardkits.com for making this video possible. Yes, I know it's my company, but still, check them out. And if you want to build a surfboard like this yourself, it's pretty easy with one of those kits. If you've liked this video, click that thumbs up button, leave a comment below, and maybe even click that subscribe button if you haven't already. And even if you are subscribed, just double check that the bell icon is selected so you get notified of all of our uploads. YouTube does some funny things and you don't always get to see them. Anyway, if you haven't seen part 1 or 2, check them out. Here and here, or there and there. Don't know how it's going to show up. Maybe it's both there. And yeah, thanks for watching. See you next time.